it's not a crime-infested hellhole. It's really not. That is not true. But that narrative has been created. Right? This adds to the doom loop downtown. The city's out of control. Crime is out of control. We need to do something. They recalled the district attorney. Chesa Boudin lost his job because of this media mythology. The San Francisco crime was out of control. All right? But now we got a problem. All right? Now you got unhappy voters. You've got this mythology of a doom loop and of crime out of control. And now guess what? First, the mayor blamed the district attorney. It's all because Chesa Boudin is too liberal and isn't locking people up enough. Right? Then she blamed the Board of Supervisors and their liberal policies of creating. But pretty soon, people are starting to say, wait a minute, aren't you in charge?
I want to welcome everyone here today and also everybody online. And just to let you know that this event will be put on YouTube in a few days after it's for the public to see it. So if anyone online doesn't want their picture to be shown, just turn your camera off. So welcome everybody, and now we'd like to welcome our esteemed speaker. Tim Redmond is a renowned UUSF Forum speaker, and he will discuss the latest local, national, and international news, particularly focusing on our fall election. He will discuss the need for candidates to address San Francisco's persistent poverty, drug addiction, and homelessness. Mr. Redmond, a political and investigative reporter, he's been working at this for over 30 years and will discuss the importance of candidates with urban management experience, success records, and ability to work with law enforcement agencies while promoting free speech. Welcome, Tim.
Can everybody hear me? Yes. Well, thank you very much for having me here. I always like speaking to Forum, and I will give you a bit of information that will help frame this discussion that is also my self-declared conflict of interest. Some of you may remember my son, Michael. He used to come to Forum when he was 9, 10 years old. He'd come with me when I would speak here a couple times a year. I'd like to think that he came to hear my words of wisdom. Actually, he came for the pastries. So we didn't usually have pastries at breakfast at home, but he'd come and he'd load up a big plate with pastries and bagels and fruit and have a grand old time. And he was, say, probably 9 or 10. That was a long time ago. He's now all grown up. He's 25 years old and has got his master's degree in climate science from the University of Michigan and is now helping run the Aaron Peskin for Mayor campaign. So when I mention, as I will, the mayor's race, keep in mind that that bias is there, I suppose. The second thing I want to tell you about the Aaron Peskin for Mayor campaign, I don't know, when was I last here, Dolores? Maybe 6 months ago, 6, 7 months ago, and I talked about the potential candidates for mayor. And I said, you know, well, a lot of people kind of wish Aaron Peskin would run, and maybe he will. And Aaron at that point was being very coy and no, you know, I'm not running for mayor, I'm not running for mayor. And I said, you know, I don't know. I mean, I think he may get over that and he might actually run. And I get a call later that day from Supervisor Peskin, who says, did you just tell the Unitarian Universalists that I'm running for mayor? And I said, no, I told them I wish you would. So anyway, I don't know who here is friends with Aaron, but that's great. Anyway, so that is what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk mostly about local politics. I'm going to talk about what's going on in San Francisco. I'm going to talk about some of the issues that we're facing in San Francisco and who some of the candidates are. As Dolores said, actually, she gives me more credit for youth than I have. I've been doing this for actually 40 years now. I've been a political and investigative reporter in San Francisco, much of that time with the late lamented San Francisco Bay Guardian. And about 10 years ago, after the Bay Guardian was sold to a new owner who I did not get along with very well, I was informed one night at midnight by email that my resignation had been accepted. And I figured that's the way it works. You know, that a new owner buys the team, they can fire the coach. It's fine. In fact, I thought, okay, that's fine. I'll go on and do something else. Funny, I went on KPFA shortly after that to talk about my career at The Guardian and what happened. And I said, hey, I'll find something else to do with my life. And the host, Brian Edwards Takert, said, Tim, you don't sound like a bitter, disgruntled ex-employee. And I said, I'm trying really hard not to be one. He goes, well, you'd never make it at KPFA. Anyway, so about 10 years ago, I started 48hills.org. 48 Hills is a progressive digital daily newspaper. And we do news, arts, and culture, primarily focusing on San Francisco. You can find it at 48hills.org. We came up with a name, my business partner, Mark Bishke and I, we were sitting around talking about what we're going to call this new thing. And I looked it up. The USGS, US Geological Survey, names 47 hills in San Francisco. There's 47 named hills in the city. And then we looked at each other and said, well, in the social justice movement, there's always one more hill to climb. So we decided to call it 48 Hills. 48 Hills is a 501c3 nonprofit, which means contributions to 48 Hills are tax deductible. I'll talk about that later. It also means that 48 Hills cannot endorse candidates for office. As a representative of 48 Hills, I'm not here to tell you who to vote for. I'm not here to endorse a candidate for office, but I am going to give you some information about some of the people who are running and some of the issues that are going on in this election and in this race. So let me start by saying this. All of the polling, all of the formal polls, all of the informal polling, everything that I've done in talking to people, the voters in San Francisco are unhappy. If you ask people if you think the city's going in the right direction or the wrong direction, about 80% say the wrong direction. And that's a really important question for pollsters. Polling is weirder now than it was 20 or 30 years ago, in part because polling used to be done by phone. It used to be, and everyone had a landline. So what they would do is they would use a random number generator, 415, 7 random digits. And they'd call those numbers until somebody picked up. And then they would ask them questions, if they were willing to participate, about how they felt about political issues, whatever else. Now nobody uses a landline, everyone has a cell phone, right? And how many of you answer your cell phone if you don't know where the call's coming from, right? Most of us don't, sometimes, right? But if you see the number, it's like, I don't know who that is, that's probably a pollster. it's probably a hustler, it's probably somebody's trying to sell me something, they don't pick it up. So it's much harder to reach people for polls, right? And it also skews, honestly, it skews tremendously around age. People of my generation and some of your generations are more likely to answer the phone. Some of us still have landlines. We're also more likely to just answer the phone when it rings. The kids never answer the phone unless they know exactly who it is calling. They don't answer the phone anyway. My kids don't answer the phone when I call them. They communicate by text, right? Or on Instagram or whatever. So so polls, the accuracy of polls is more, but nevertheless, there have been many, many polls done in the last 6 months that all of them say the right track, wrong track question goes this way. Everybody thinks the city's going in the wrong direction. Some of that is because they are on the left side of the spectrum, and they don't like the way the city is moving on homelessness, on housing, on policing. Some of it is people who are more conservative, who don't like the way the city is moving on housing and policing. Right? And the number of people who support the current incumbents' policies is shrinking, is getting thinner and thinner. Right? So the corollary to this, of course, is the people are unhappy with the mayor. Right? Mayor London Breed's popularity right now is very, very low in the polling. And again, that is interestingly across the spectrum. It's not that the liberals and progressives don't like the mayor. The conservatives don't like, well, I don't say don't like the mayor, don't like the mayor's policies. Right? The conservatives don't either. I'd say her coalition, which was built more towards the center, right, is shrinking, as the center, frankly, is shrinking in San Francisco right now. So she is very vulnerable. And let me talk a little bit about this because I think this is a really important thing to understand in context. People are unhappy, voters are unhappy across the country right now. You can say the same thing if you ask people about whether they think the country's going in the right direction or the wrong direction. A lot of people think the country's going in the wrong direction, and that goes across the spectrum. It is particularly true of young people. There are young people out there, many, many young people, feel like they have no hope in the United States right now. In fact, my nephew likes to say to his mother and to me, "You baby boomers have ruined it for all of us. You baby boomers have ruined the country for all of us." And that is not completely untrue, by the way. At some point, I'm going to write a book about this. That is not completely untrue. But young people in San Francisco look around and they say, "How am I ever going to afford to live here? I can never buy a home. I can never buy a house. I can never make enough money to earn a decent living here. Unless I work for a very limited number of industries that pay very, very high salaries, I'm not going to make it here. What future is there for me here?" And I think young people are saying that all over the country. And I think there are very good reasons for that. And I will come back to this later when I talk about housing policy. But I just want to talk about something for a second that I think is really important for all of us to understand, okay? I think this is one of the most important political stories that nobody's talking about in the country right now. About 2.5 years ago, the Rand Corporation did a study. And this is not Tim the socialist talking here. This is the Rand Corporation. This is a typically very conservative think tank. You all have probably heard of them. They're in Southern California. They're a typically very conservative think tank, but they did a detailed study. And I've looked at it. It's very well researched. And what they concluded is that if the United States today had the same tax structure and the same level of economic inequality that we had in 1975, the lower 90% would have an additional $50 trillion. That's a big number. $50 trillion. The average working person would be making $48,000 a year more than they are making now, in real terms. The average person who now makes $1 million a year would be making several $100,000 less in real terms. Right? That is if we had the same tax structure that we had under those radical socialists, Richard Nixon and Dwight Eisenhower. Okay, where rich people and corporations paid a fair share of the taxes. $50 trillion. You know what that is? That's a complete national healthcare system. Right? That is free college education for everyone. Right? That is hope for young people when you redistribute that wealth. All right? What has happened, and any economist will tell you, some of you already know this, but any economist will tell you that the way a society gets richer is increased productivity. That's really the only way a society gets richer as a whole, is when human beings can do more in an hour than they could before. Right? And this happens with technology, and it happens with different modes of labor and all kinds of different things. Okay, if you follow productivity in the United States following World War II, there was a tremendous increase in productivity in the United States of America. US workers could make more in less time. Right? And that productivity line goes up like this, all right? The line that shows wage increases goes up at the same time, pretty much parallel. And there's lots of data on this, all right? 1980, it shifted, and now it's like this, right? Productivity goes up, wages go down, all right? And it's pretty dramatic, actually. Pretty much all of that wealth in society that has been created by the technological revolutions of the last 20 years, 30 years. All of that wealth, 100% of that wealth has gone to the top 10%, and most of it to the top 1%. So you wonder why kids can't afford to buy a house. That's it right there. You wonder why people are so unhappy with the state of the economy. On the right, on the left, across the board, why people are so unhappy with the state of the economy. There it is right there. We have a level of economic inequality in the United States that has never been seen in this country before, and it's terrifying. It is unsettling, it is unstable, and Thomas Piketty, the famous French economist, written a book called Capital in the 21st Century. It's really important. It's also 800 pages. But I will tell you something about Piketty. You don't have to read all 800 pages. I did. Trust me, you don't have to read all 800 pages. If you read the first 100 pages, he makes his point, and then he spends 700 pages proving it. And as I tell my students, trust me, he proves it. Right? You don't have to read that. But what Piketty argues is that the rate of growth in what he calls R, because of course he's an economist, everything has to be an equation. His equation is R is greater than G. R is the rate of return on existing wealth. In other words, R is the money you make by already being rich. Right? The rate of return on existing wealth is greater than the growth in GDP anywhere in the world right now. So in other words, the rich, by being rich, are getting richer faster than productivity, GDP increase, or anything else can catch up. And that is creating what he calls a completely socially unstable society. Right? So we'll come back to this when I talk about housing, but I think this is a really important thing to understand when you look at why people are unhappy. San Francisco has 68 billionaires. There are 68 billionaires who live here, and there's a whole lot more of what they call centimillionaires, people who have net worth of $100 million or more living in the city. And there are, by different estimates, between 5,000 and 8,000 homeless people on the streets. Go figure. Right? When I moved to San Francisco in 1981, and some of you were here in 1981, there were virtually no homeless people in San Francisco. There were always, and I worked as a volunteer at the Haight-Ashbury Switchboard, which was a kind of neighborhood crisis referral center, and there were always the kids who would show up thinking it was still the summer of love. And they'd show up in 1982 looking for a digger and a crash pad and thinking people were going to take care of them, and we'd have to tell them, look, you know, that ended a long time ago, and no, there are no more crash pads, and you know, you're going to have to find a place to live, or you're going to end up sleeping in the park. And they would either get a job and find a place to live, or go back where they came from. But if you were an indigent adult in San Francisco in 1981, you could go to the welfare office and tell them you had no money, and they would give you $340 in cash and about another 100 something in food stamps. And a room in a SRO hotel was $25 a week. So you could live on public benefits in San Francisco. So homelessness didn't really start until the Reagan era. When Reagan came to office, actually Carter started it first. Jimmy Carter cut corporate taxes in 1978. And Reagan followed with, of course, dramatically slashing personal income taxes, dramatically slashing corporate taxes. And that's never come back. The Democrats haven't brought it back. The Republicans haven't brought it back. The tax rate now is actually, thanks to Trump, even lower than it was when Reagan first made his dramatic tax cuts. That had an impact, right? That had an impact. And we're seeing that right now. There's that $50 trillion. That's where that went, right? It went to the very top because they don't have to pay taxes anymore. Right? And at the same time, the other thing that Reagan did is he cut funding for public housing, for HUD. And it's never come back. It didn't come back under Clinton. It didn't come back under Obama. It hasn't come back under Biden. The money that cities used to get to build housing for low-income people never came back. So the rich get richer. There's no money for housing. And you wonder why we have homeless people in San Francisco, in a city that has 68 billionaires. Right? So you put together the level of economic inequality in San Francisco, the price of housing, the number of homeless people on the streets, and you've got a very unhappy populace, right? Now, add to that, let's add another twist to that, to what's going on in San Francisco, which you all know about. Right? Since the late 1970s and early 1980s, under then Mayor Dianne Feinstein, and followed by mayors after her, the city decided, that the powers that be in San Francisco decided that the city's economic future was based on a downtown core of high-rise offices catering to the finance, insurance, and real estate industry. Right? Later on, tech. That this is where the city's future was going to be. In fact, Dianne Feinstein used to say, she said to me, she said to other people, look, this is the goose that laid the golden egg. Downtown development is making the city rich. And this is where our economy is going to come from in the future. Finance, insurance, real estate, and tech offices, big office buildings downtown. And some of us said, you know, it's never a good idea to have a monocrop economy. A monocrop economy, the farmers know this. If all you grow is corn and there's some pest that kills the corn, you're out of business. If you grow corn and soybeans and oats and wheat and something gets the corn, you've still got the soybeans and the oats and the wheat. All right? Monocrop economies are fundamentally unstable. Right? But for all these years, we've had we destroyed the printing industry south of Market to make space for, and the warehouse industry, blue-collar jobs, what we call production, distribution, and repair, all got pushed out to make room for tech offices. Right? And guess what? Then we get a pandemic. And then people discover that they can work remotely. And guess what? There are 4 industries where remote work is particularly suited: finance, insurance, real estate, and tech. Right? Those are particularly suited to remote work. So there's no one downtown anymore. So that goose that laid the golden egg is dead. And nobody knows what to do about it. Nobody knows what to do about downtown. You put all of this together, as I say, and you have a relatively unhappy population. Right? Now, stage 2, step into this realm, the billionaires. There are about half a dozen billionaires, all of whom made their money in the tech business, who have decided that it's time to take over San Francisco. And they have an agenda. And it is a disturbing agenda. In some cases, it's an absolutely scary agenda, right? That what they want for San Francisco. And they have discovered that you put enough money into elections with an unhappy population looking for simple answers, and you can win. And this is what they have been doing. Tens of millions of dollars are going to be flowing into the election in San Francisco this fall. Now, many of you already know this, but just let me remind you, in municipal elections in San Francisco, there is a campaign contribution limit. If you decide you want to support London Breed for mayor or Daniel Lurie for mayor, you don't need to support Daniel Lurie. His mom's a billionaire. She's already given him $1 million. But if you want to, I'll get back to that in a second. If you want to support a candidate for mayor, you can give them up to $500. And that is in place so that a handful of tech billionaires can't control the city. It's supposed to be all of us getting together and each of us giving a couple $100s to the candidate that we like, and there's a diverse base, okay? But there's a loophole. And this loophole has been created by the Supreme Court in a case called Buckley v. Vallejo from years ago, and more recently in the Citizens United case. And what that loophole is, what we call independent expenditure committees, all right? I can give $500 to a candidate for mayor. As a journalist, I don't donate to candidates, but if I wanted to, I could give $500. Any of you could give $500 for a candidate for mayor, right? But should I decide, hey, or should suppose I'm running for mayor, and one of you decides, Dolores says, oh God, we can't have Redmond be mayor, right? Whatever happens, we can't have Redmond be mayor. Well, instead of giving money to the person who's running against me, she goes off, not that Dolores would ever do this, but she goes off on her own and creates what's called an independent expenditure committee, right? And let's say that Dolores had $1 billion. Hey, if you have $1 billion, 48 Hills could use some. But say she has $1 billion. She can spend $1 billion on what's called an independent expenditure committee doing nothing but attacking me. The only rule is, because that's the First Amendment, that's her free speech right. And the courts have ruled since 1968 or 69 in Buckley v. Vallejo, the courts have ruled that money is speech. And that I have the free speech right to spend my $1 billion if I had it any way I want to, as long as I'm not coordinating directly with the candidate. So there is an independent expenditure committee supporting Daniel Lurie for mayor. I will get back to that in a second. His mother has given it $1 million to support Daniel Lurie for mayor. Theoretically, that committee cannot coordinate with Daniel Lurie for mayor, which means theoretically he can't talk to his mother about the race. I don't know how closely these rules are actually followed in reality. In reality, there's often a lot of very kind of shaky connections that happen here. Nevertheless, that's what we're going to see. We're going to see at least $10 million, probably more, pouring into the mayor's race and into some of the supervisor races. And this is for a reason. Right? This is for a reason. The tech folks who are pouring all this money have an agenda. And in some cases, it's kind of creepy. In fact, there's a guy named Balaji Srinivasan, whose name I probably just mispronounced, who has written a piece about this that has now come out on social media, and I've written about it, others have written about it, where he has basically said he wants to create a society in San Francisco where we have what he calls the grays and the blues. And the grays are the tech folks, and they all wear gray t-shirts around. And they acknowledge each other with a fist bump when they see each other on the street, and they nod to each other, and they essentially worship at the altar of Elon Musk, and they run the city. And there are exclusionary zones where only grays are allowed to go. And the blues, I guess that's me, the blues are the liberals who created the problems that the grays see San Francisco has. And it's the blues that are the source of all of the problems in San Francisco. So they're not allowed into certain parts of the city. Right? They're only allowed into other areas. And then there's the reds, they're the Republicans. They're welcome. They're not quite the same as the grays, but they're okay. Right? So we'll let the grays and the reds, but the blues are essentially second-class citizens and are forced into small parts of the city and are not allowed to participate in the rest of society. He actually talks about this, right? He actually is talking publicly about this. They are talking publicly. There are tech workers who are talking, tech billionaires who are talking publicly about buying up all the property around Alamo Square and creating a tech oasis there for tech workers to live and run their own kind of mini city within a city. Right? This is actually going on. This is actually being talked about. Right? The agenda on a broader level has to do with taxes and regulation. Right? These are folks, very rich folks, who want to see lower taxes on rich people, and I'll come back to that in a minute, and they want to see less regulation on tech. Right? For example, the city has put regulations into place on the robocabs, on the driverless cars, right? You can't just have driverless cars everywhere, right? The state of California has put some regulations on driverless cars. You can only have a certain number, and they can only operate during these periods, and they have to be regular. Well, there's a reason for that, right? I mean, the next thing, of course, is, this is an aside, but it's interesting, is driverless trucks. Can you imagine an 80,000-pound vehicle going down the freeway at 70 miles an hour with no driver? They can. They're talking about it. And the Teamsters Union has been talking about how we need to regulate driverless trucks. They've had state legislation to regulate driverless trucks, which, by the way, Gavin Newsom vetoed, but it'll come back. To regulate, to say, okay, you can't just do anything because you have the technology to do it. Right? Next thing I'm hearing about is robo-deliveries, where Amazon, instead of hiring human beings, will have robots going along the sidewalk, coming up in front of your house, ringing your doorbell, and the box will open, the top will open up, and your package will be there. Right? My sidewalks in my neighborhood are like about as narrow as this road. Right? I don't really see the robot going along. There's also a lot of older people in my neighborhood, some of them who have mobility issues. I don't think this idea is going to work so good in Bernal Heights. The robot's taking over the sidewalk, and nevertheless, the tech people would like to say, the last thing we need is government to regulate this, right? We need to, that stifles innovation. We need to not regulate the tech industry, right? San Francisco regulated Airbnb, not fast enough, but regulated Airbnb. You have to have a certain type of permit. You can only rent out your house as a hotel room under certain circumstances, right? Airbnb didn't like this, right? The robo-cars, pretty soon there'll be robo-drone deliveries. Right? The cops want robots with guns. The cops want to have robots carrying weapons, going into places where they'd rather not send a human being. Right? All of this, and there's lots more. There's increases in technology, and some of us say, okay, it's not stifling innovation to go a little slower, to take a deep breath and say, maybe we shouldn't have the robots doing deliveries on narrow sidewalks quite yet. Let's work out some of the problems first. Right? The tech industry doesn't want to see any regulations. They don't want to see taxes on the wealthy. And this is a group of folks, some of them libertarian, some of them on a different political spectrum, who basically believe that the free market will solve most of our problems. Right? I'll get back to this when I talk about housing in a minute. Right? The free market will solve most of our problems. Right? And the solution to almost any problem is a market-based solution. This is a policy that came into place under Reagan. It is known in academic worlds as neoliberalism, the idea that government should stay out of the way in general of markets, and that capitalist markets will solve most of our social problems, okay? This is a political agenda. Now, I'm not saying that everyone in the tech industry, every billionaire even in San Francisco, supports the idea of the blues and the grays and the exclusionary zones for people like me. But there is a larger agenda here, okay? Now, let's put on top of that the media narrative that's been created in San Francisco in the last couple of years. And the media narrative goes by terms like doom loop, right? City infested with crime. Now, this started, interestingly enough, this media narrative, the crime narrative, started during the pandemic. And it started in part because London Breed, who was the mayor of San Francisco, didn't like Chesa Boudin, who got elected district attorney, because she supported a different candidate, and Chesa beat her candidate, right? And so she and her allies started talking about how crime is out of control under the new liberal DA, because he's not prosecuting enough criminals, and therefore crime is out of control. Well, first of all, in the middle of a global pandemic, the courts were closed. Couldn't prosecute anyone. You couldn't lock that many people in jail because the jails were not safe environments for people. They were congregate environments. People were dying. Right? So during the height of the global pandemic, no one was getting prosecuted because there were no judges in the courtroom, and you couldn't have a jury in the courtroom. Right? Second, what happened was, again, a global pandemic. San Francisco's always had problems with car break-ins and theft, petty theft. For many, many years, this was concentrated, and if you look at the crime maps, you'll see this was concentrated at Fisherman's Wharf, Union Square, places where tourists are. And there were groups of folks who would break into cars and steal the tourist stuff and sell it. right? This is actually, as far as I can tell, relatively well-organized operations, breaking into tourist cars. Well, remember, we had a global pandemic, no tourists. Tourism went to essentially zero. Hotel occupancy went to zero. No one went to Fisherman's Wharf. No one went to Union Square as tourists. So there were no tourist cars to break into. So that moved into neighborhoods. People started breaking into cars in people's neighborhoods. And now all of a sudden, those of us who live in San Francisco, as opposed to being tourists, are noticing this. People are breaking into cars. People are breaking into cars in my neighborhood. I don't lock my car because there's nothing to steal. And I would prefer they don't break the window. The only thing that's ever been stolen out of my car, think about this for a second, somebody stole my 1975 Bob Dylan Blood on the Tracks CD from my car. And I thought to myself, whoever stole that, I hope they get a couple bucks for it. Because no one listens to CDs. And I don't know who you're going to sell a 1975 Bob Dylan album to on the streets anyway. But this, so people started noticing that, all right? And of course, because we're in the middle of a global pandemic, there was retail theft and, other problems. Now, violent crime in San Francisco is radically down from what it used to be. Right? It's down. It's been falling dramatically over the last 20 years. When I moved to San Francisco in 1981, I think there were like 200 homicides that year. I think so far this year there's been about 10 in San Francisco. Violent crime is way down. But the media loves a crime story. And when Chesa Boudin was DA, this mythology was created, in part coming out of the mayor's office, that San Francisco was unsafe because of the DA. Now, it also didn't help that the San Francisco police essentially went on a working strike. Right? The San Francisco cops stopped arresting people. And they stopped arresting. In fact, there were very clear times, like these are stories I heard myself, when people would report a crime. Somebody broke into my basement and stole my bicycle. Somebody broke into my car and stole my laptop. And the cops would say, we're not going to even bother filing a report because the DA won't prosecute anyway. Right? So you put all of these things together, and then you get KPIX News and the TV stations and the Chronicle finding an example of a crime and turning it into a global trend. Right? Media does this all the time, and it drives me nuts. They go out, they parachute into San Francisco, they interview 5 people, and they find a global trend. Right? And literally, this happens all the time. Right? And so the trend is crime is out of control in San Francisco. Right? There's a video of a guy going into a Walgreens on a bicycle and stealing a bunch of stuff. Right? And never mind that the guy was actually ultimately arrested. That video of the guy driving around on a bicycle in a Walgreens stealing a bunch of stuff goes viral. It becomes a national trend. My God, San Francisco is so out of control. People are riding bicycles through Walgreens and stealing toothpaste, right? And this, as I say, becomes it. So it gets picked up by the New York Times, and it gets picked up by, CBS News, and it gets picked up by the Washington Post. And suddenly, San Francisco is a horrible, hellish, crime-infested city. And it's, I say, that this is on the front page of the Chronicle. It's on all the TV stations. Right? And you've all seen this. You've all seen these stories. I don't see it when I walk around the city. I do not see San Francisco as a horrible, hellish, crime-infested city. It's got its problems, but it's a pretty nice place. I teach classes at the University of San Francisco. I teach in the media studies department. And I had a student who came to sit in on one of my classes who had been admitted to USF last year. And I said to her afterwards, well, I hope you enjoyed my journalism class. I hope that you decide you want to go to school here. And she said, well, I really want to go to school here, but my mother says San Francisco isn't safe. I mean, this is real. And I look around, it's like, you ever walked around the USF campus? It's not a crime-infested hellhole. It's really not. That is not true. But that narrative has been created. Right? This adds to the doom loop downtown. The city is out of control. Crime is out of control. We need to do something. They recalled the district attorney. Chesa Boudin lost his job because of this media mythology. The San Francisco crime was out of control. All right? But now we got a problem. All right? Now you got unhappy voters. You've got this mythology of a doom loop and of crime out of control. And now guess what? First, the mayor blamed the district attorney. It's all because Chesa Boudin is too liberal and isn't locking people up enough. Right? Then she blamed the Board of Supervisors and their liberal policies of creating. But pretty soon, people are starting to say, wait a minute, aren't you in charge? Right? San Francisco has a very strong mayor system, and it's not because of London Breed or Willie Brown. It's the city charter. The mayor has a lot of power in San Francisco, more than in most cities. We have a very strong mayor system. That's how our city charter works, right? And people are starting to say, wait a minute, you're in charge, you're the mayor. You've been the mayor for 5 years. What's going on here? Why aren't you fixing any of these problems, right? So you have a very unpopular incumbent. With an unpopular incumbent, you have a bunch of people running to take her job. And because of the mythology that's been created by the media, the candidates who are running and because of some of the serious problems that San Francisco faces that are not being addressed, most of the candidates are trying to run to the right. London Breed kind of ran as a centrist. She's moving to the right. She's talking about, this is a mayor who once said she wanted to help defund the police and take $60 million from the police budget and move it into programs for African Americans in San Francisco. Now she's talking about how defunding the police is a terrible idea. That's all the crazy liberals on the Board of Supervisors, by the way, who have approved every single police budget that she has put forward. Nevertheless, she's running to the right. More cops on the streets, more arrests, put more people in jail. All right. Mark Farrell, who was basically acting mayor of San Francisco for about 6 months before London Breed got elected after Ed Lee tragically died at a relatively young age. Mark Farrell is essentially running as a Republican. He's talking about we need the National Guard to come into the Tenderloin. Joe Eskenazi, who writes for Mission Local, had a good line. He said that the debate about law enforcement in the mayor's race seems to be focused on whether we should bring the National Guard into the Tenderloin or the Navy SEALs. That seems to be where they're all running on a more conservative platform. Deregulate housing, because it's regulations that have created the housing crisis. I'm going to come back to that in a minute, right? Deregulate tech, cut taxes on businesses, and hire more cops and give them more authority to arrest more people. Now, another interesting story in Mission Local, which is also another nonprofit news source in San Francisco. Joe did an interesting interview with a guy who's an inmate in San Francisco County Jail who cannot wait to be sent to state prison. Because he said conditions in the San Francisco County Jail, which is usually a lot more chill than state prison. I mean, the San Francisco County Jail is, back in the day, was, I'd say, a much more chill place, a lot less violent. People had things to do. There were classes. It was, as under a series of progressive sheriffs, as jails go, it wasn't that bad. Now, the conditions are absolutely horrible, in part because the sheriff's department is so desperately understaffed that they don't have enough deputies to handle all of the inmates, and also because under Breed's administration and under this district attorney, they are locking up more people who are arrested not only for selling drugs, but for being high on drugs. You can now be arrested in San Francisco for being high on drugs if you're not in your own home or at City Hall or wherever else people use substances. You can be arrested for being high. Right? This inmate says that what's basically happened is the San Francisco County Jail has become a mental health center with no treatment. There are mentally ill people who have been locked up and put in the county jail. There is no treatment for them. It is violent, it is unsafe. This is the result of the policies not only that the Breed administration has been pushing, but that mostly certainly her two main rivals on the right, which is Daniel Lurie and Mark Farrell, are talking about. So that has pushed her to the right. So, the debate over crime has become the National Guard versus the Navy SEALs, right? And how many people can we lock up, and how can we give the cops more authority, and how can we deregulate housing so that we'll get more of it? I'm going to come back to that in a second. Right? This is that side of the debate. Right? So you've got Mark Farrell, as I say, former mayor, who's basically running as a Republican. You've got Daniel Lurie, who has never held public office at all. He's never been a commissioner. His only claim to fame is that his mother inherited the Levi Strauss fortune, and he founded a nonprofit called Tipping Point, which has done some good work. I'm not saying Tipping Point hasn't done any good work. Running the city of San Francisco is a lot different than running a nonprofit organization. Right? It's a lot bigger, and it's a lot more complicated. And the idea that people can come from the nonprofit sector or the business sector and suddenly walk in and run a city like San Francisco has often had problems in the past. Right? It's a challenging system. People with no political experience are going to face serious challenges. Right? But that is his argument, is I got new ideas. In fact, he's proud of it. I've never been in City Hall. Don't blame me. Right? Now, again, let us stipulate anyone who was in City Hall during the pandemic, the voters are mad at. Because you couldn't win. If you shut down the schools, people were mad. If you opened the schools and everyone got COVID, people would be mad. Right? The COVID situation was a no-win situation for politicians because, first of all, it hit us all really fast and by surprise. Nobody was ready for it. Nobody knew what to do. Right? So, yes, he can say, I wasn't there when there was crime in the streets. I wasn't there when I wasn't in City Hall, but he also wasn't there to try to address any of these problems. Right? So you've got him. Then you've got Asha Safai. Supervisor Safai represents District 11 and is trying to run as more of a centrist. He's trying to say he's a pro-labor guy. He was in City Hall. He's more, yes, he's in favor of the police, but he's not as far to the right as the rest of these folks are. The problem is that sector of the city, the centrist part of the city that helped London Breed get elected, is vanishing, right? I don't know how he expects to get votes. I don't know where he expects to get his votes from, right? And then you got Aaron Peskin. And Aaron waited until very late to get in the race. A lot of these other people have been running for a year. I mean, London Breed's been running for 5 years, but a lot of these folks have been running for a year or more. And Aaron waited until a couple of months ago to announce he's running. And he's in an interesting situation because Aaron Peskin, I will say for the record, here I am, I'm gonna be on YouTube, I will say for the record, Aaron Peskin is not a socialist. Aaron Peskin is not a leftist, right? You know, in many ways, he's been kind of a guy who tries to forge coalitions and tries to make things happen and make things work. Right? But he is definitely on the progressive side of all of the other candidates. And he is the candidate who many of the progressives in San Francisco have coalesced around. Right? And they have coalesced around Aaron because Aaron is, I will say, again, for the record, while I have disagreed with Aaron Peskin on issues in the past, the guy knows how to run a city. He's been doing it for a long time as president of the Board of Supervisors. He's smart, and he's also honest. There's never been any hint of corruption around Aaron Peskin. And you know, a lot of people, progressives, will say, well, at least he'll work with us. He's better on a lot of issues. He will work with us. And Aaron, by the way, Aaron Peskin is a regulator. Aaron Peskin believes in regulating industry. He believes in regulating tech. He was the one who pushed for regulations on Airbnb. He's pushed for regulations away. He pushed for regulations on Uber. Back when Uber first started as an illegal cab industry, everything Uber did for its first 2 years of existence was against the law. They were running an unlicensed taxi agency, and Mayor Ed Lee, who supported the tech industry, wouldn't stop them. And Peskin came out and said, look, we need to regulate this stuff. Right? So people are, so the path for Aaron Peskin is interesting. If there's you know, several candidates in the race, and we have ranked choice voting. Right? If Aaron Peskin can consolidate the left, right, consolidate the progressive vote, which is probably 25 to 30% of the vote, the solid progressive vote in San Francisco, right, and then get enough of the, he's also been very, very popular in Chinatown, and will get a certain percentage of the Chinese vote, and then go to the west side of town and tell people that he doesn't want to see bulldozers go into the sunset and demolish existing housing. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. There's maybe a winning coalition there, right? There's maybe a winning coalition for Breed. There's maybe a winning coalition for Farrell. There's maybe a winning coalition for Lurie. At this point, everyone's polling around 20 to 25%. There is no front runner. There's no clear favorite. So at this point, honestly, it's almost anyone's race to win or to lose. London Breed has the misfortune of being an unpopular incumbent, representing a sector of the city that is shrinking, but I don't mean demographically, I mean politically, right? That there's the kind of broad centrist sector that elected her and she represented is shrinking from both sides, is getting squeezed on both sides. Maybe Farrell gets all of the conservative votes and maybe he gets second place votes from other people. We don't know where the second place votes are gonna go. There's talk, the billionaires are gonna come in and they're gonna do an anyone but Peskin campaign. That's what it's gonna be, anyone but Aaron. They could live with Lurie, they could live with Farrell, they can certainly live with Breed, they could probably live with Safai. They really don't want to see Aaron Peskin because, again, among other things, he's a regulator, right? They don't want to see that happen, right? So they'll be spending billions of dollars on anyone but Aaron. Will there be a ranked choice voting strategy among the more conservative candidates? I don't know, because they don't really like each other. London Breed and Mark Farrell are not close. In fact, she's really mad because he took her job. She wanted to be the acting mayor after Ed Lee died, and the Board of Supervisors, knowing she was going to run for mayor, picked an interim person who wasn't going to run for mayor, and that was Mark Farrell. Right? She is not close to Mark Farrell. Mark Farrell is not close to her. In fact, they're all saying that she failed the city. When you're running against an incumbent, you have to say the incumbent isn't doing a good job, as opposed to, the incumbent's kind of okay. Vote for me second, vote for her first, vote for her first, vote for me second. You can't do that and be effective when you're running against an incumbent. You have to say the incumbent's failing. Otherwise, why am I running? If the incumbent's doing okay, why am I running against her? So I don't know whether there's a ranked choice voting strategy for the more conservative candidates. I don't know. So at this point, nobody knows what's actually going to happen in this mayor's race. It is wide open. And anybody who's predicting victory for any candidate hasn't been paying attention to what's going on. Right, so I don't want to run out of time here. At the same time, the tech billionaires really want to get rid of progressive control of the Board of Supervisors. Right? And the progressives have a, not always solid, but a fairly solid majority on the Board of Supervisors right now. They want to change that. And so we're going to see big money poured in particularly to District 1 and District 5. District 1 is Connie Chan. That is the Richmond district. Now, one of the things that London Breed successfully did as mayor is she gerrymandered the Board of Supervisors districts. She had a majority on the redistricting committee that decided where the new district lines were going to be drawn. And they changed some of the lines. One of the things they did in District 1 is they moved Seacliff, which is a very conservative area, very conservative, wealthy area, right? You all know where Seacliff is. That's, there are Republicans living in Seacliff. There's Republicans in San Francisco. Right? There are. I mean, Trump got, 10 or 15% of the vote in San Francisco. Right? So they moved that conservative area into District 1. It used to be in District 2, which was a more conservative district anyway. Right? They took some of the more liberal parts out of that district. They did this in District 5. They took the Tenderloin out of District 6, which was Soma, and they moved it into District 5, taking some of the more progressive parts of District 5 out. All right, so District 1 is Connie Chan. There's going to be big money poured into an independent expenditure committee to get rid of Connie Chan because she's very much a progressive vote. And they'll be supporting Marjan Philhauer. This is a rerun 4 years ago. Connie beat Marjan by 150, 200 votes. That's a very, very close district, and now they've moved Seacliff into it. Right? District 5 is Dean Preston, who is a Democratic Socialist, proudly a Democratic Socialist. Elon Musk has personally said that he will give $100,000 to a campaign to defeat Dean Preston. He doesn't even live in San Francisco. He lives in Austin, I think. Now, maybe he moved last week. He doesn't even live in, why is he so mad at a District 5 supervisor in San Francisco who happens to identify as a Democratic Socialist? I don't think Dean Preston has ever done anything to harm Elon Musk. He doesn't represent the district where the Tesla factory is. What is this about? Well, it's about this mythology of the left ruining San Francisco. All right, let me talk about that for a minute, okay? Because this is really what's underlying a lot of this. There's a book that came out a couple of years ago called San Francisco: How Progressives Have Ruined American Cities. And I found this very interesting book. And when I read it, I wrote a review of it, and one of the first things that occurred to me is, wait a minute. First of all, wrong. Second, under what possible scenario have progressives been running San Francisco? I wish they were, but San Francisco has been run since 1991 by a series of neoliberal mayors, by a series of relatively conservative neoliberal mayors who believe in market solutions to everything, who are not in favor of regulating the tech industry. Right? That's who's been running the city. San Francisco is a very strong mayor system. Right? London Breed is not a progressive. Neither was Gavin Newsom, neither was Ed Lee. Right? If San Francisco has all kinds of serious problems, how come you're blaming the folks who have been in the minority the whole time, who haven't been running the city? Right? Second, I will argue, what has caused the damage that we're facing in San Francisco right now is more than anything else economic inequality. Is that $50 trillion? Is that 68 billionaires? Right? The argument that you get from the YIMBYs and from the tech folks is it's regulations, particularly regulations on housing, that have created this problem. It's because San Francisco has too much red tape and strict zoning laws that we're not able to build enough housing to meet the demand, and that's why there's homeless people. Right? This is a line that I've heard over and over again. And you know what I say to the folks I know who make this argument is, look, I'm not against density. I'm not against building more housing. If I believed that letting the private market build more housing would bring housing prices down enough that my kids could afford to buy a house in San Francisco, I'd be all in favor. I'm all in favor of that. But it doesn't work. There is no evidence anywhere in the United States, and academics have been studying this now for quite a few years, there is no evidence that upzoning and allowing the private market to build more market rate housing ever brings prices down. It doesn't work, and it can't. Right? The private market cannot solve San Francisco's housing crisis, cannot solve the United States housing crisis. Right? It's not going to work. Right? And it's not going to work because that's not how housing markets work. Right? Housing in San Francisco, there are 40,000 units of housing in San Francisco that have been approved and are ready to be constructed right now. Shovel ready. Go out there with your shovel, break ground. Good to go. No red tape, no permit problems. It's approved. It's in the pipeline. Planning Commission's approved, the Board of Supervisors signed off, it's ready to go. It's not getting built. That's not red tape. That's capitalism. Right? The Federal Reserve has pushed interest rates so high that you can't make enough money building housing anymore in San Francisco. When I hear this argument, and I hear it all the time, you've probably heard this too. San Francisco needs to build more housing. How many people have heard that? San Francisco needs to build more housing. Okay, here's the problem with that. San Francisco doesn't build housing. San Francisco hasn't built housing since the 60s, when we built public housing, which became segregated housing and became a serious problem, although we know how to do public housing right now. San Francisco doesn't build housing. Who builds housing? Developers. Developers build housing. And there's two kinds of developers who build housing in San Francisco. There's for-profit market rate developers, and there's nonprofit developers. For-profit market rate developers are not interested in housing. They're interested in profits. That's how the system works. That is how capitalism works. You don't build housing to build, private developers don't build housing so that you'll have a place to live. They build housing so they'll make a buck. That's how the American system works. And in order to make a buck building housing, you have to get enough return on your investment. And that means that you have to get high enough price for that housing to pay off the people who loan you the money to build it. And with most multifamily housing now, with large housing development right now, that is not Bank of America. That is international speculative capital. That is real estate investment trust, that is hedge funds, that is pension funds. That's capital that's looking for a return on its investment. Right? Again, that's just how the system works. Right? And if the return on investment is not high enough to pay for the cost of the housing, it's not going to get built. And that's where we are right now. Right? It's not NIMBYs that are stopping housing in San Francisco right now. It's the Federal Reserve. It's capitalism. There's not enough profit building housing. The other kind of housers in San Francisco are nonprofit housing developers. And nonprofit housing developers build housing with government subsidies. Because it doesn't work. You cannot build affordable housing in San Francisco right now. You can't build housing for the middle class in San Francisco right now without government subsidies. It doesn't work. Right? I'm almost out of time, right? Yeah, so, all right, I'm sure people have questions. That is basically an overview of what's going on in San Francisco right now, is we have the billionaire class that is trying to do what they used to call a leveraged buyout, right? They're trying to basically take over San Francisco politics, and they've got the money to do it. And this is all going to play out in November. And they are going after Aaron Peskin, as I say, who is not a socialist, but he does believe in regulating tech. He is a regulator. They're going after him, and they're going to go after Connie Chan, they're going to go after Dean Preston, they're going to try to take control of the Board of Supervisors. And I'm going to argue right here, and then I'll stop, that the next item on their agenda is getting rid of district elections. And the reason they don't want district elections is you can win a district election. Dean Preston can win in District 5, even if Elon Musk gives $100,000 to defeat him. You can win a district election knocking on doors. Right? You can't win a citywide election without millions of dollars. So if you get rid of district elections of supervisors, you give the millionaires and the billionaires more power. And I think that's their agenda down the road. All right, I'll stop now because I'm sure there's questions. Thank you all for listening.
Tim Redmond, thank you very much for your presentation. We do have questions, but we also just want to emphasize that neither Forum nor the Unitarian Universalist Society of San Francisco makes endorsements for candidates. So vote for Aaron Peskin only if you find he's the right candidate. It's good to know that if Aaron Peskin does win, your son will be pulling the strings of
Yes,
mayoral office.
absolutely. Yes, that's right.
But
Yeah.
we vote for Aaron Peskin only if you find he's the right candidate for you.
I would second that. I'm not endorsing candidates either. And I told you I have a conflict of interest, but what I think is really important for all of us is to vote. Please vote in your district supervisor election, vote in the mayor's race, vote for the candidate who you think best represents your interests. And I hope I have given you some indication of my perspective on what the candidates represent. I actually don't think that most of them would disagree with my description of what they represent. Right? Vote for the candidate who represents your interests, but for God's sakes, go out and vote.
So we are going to ask people to write down their questions. Dolores will gladly collect those, and I'll gladly read them. So first question. When Trump came to power, there was an organized effort to protect immigrants here in San Francisco. With the prospect of Trump coming to power again with a fascist agenda, are there any candidates or any discussion among city leaders as to what to do in the face of a fascist program?
Well, first of all, let us all hope and pray that does not happen. Right? The prospect of a second Trump presidency is pretty scary, particularly from, I'm a journalist. I'm an enemy of the people. I'm the kind of person he wants to put in jail. Right? And I'm not kidding. Anyway, San Francisco has long been a sanctuary city. And that means that San Francisco authorities do not cooperate with ICE. If you are arrested in San Francisco and you are an undocumented immigrant, we as a city do not report you to ICE. Right? This is a very important part of San Francisco. And right now, there's pretty much consensus at City Hall on that. Mayor London Breed supports Sanctuary City. The supervisor supports Sanctuary City. The sheriff reluctantly supports Sanctuary City. That is kind of consensus. I worry about that changing. I don't know where Chris Larson and Elon Musk and Ron Conway and the billionaires feel about whether San Francisco should be a sanctuary city. I do know that there is a lot of argument out there that, and this comes from the Trumpites, that undocumented immigrants are causing the crime problems. Remember, the Chronicle had a series recently about how the people who are selling drugs in the Tenderloin are Honduran immigrants, and that there's somehow there's a town in Honduras where everybody leaves that town to come to San Francisco to sell drugs. You've probably all read this series. The problem with that in my mind is it is wrong, but it also creates a perception that immigrants are criminals. And if that perception gets strong enough in San Francisco, this could be threatened.
Could you tell us how ranked choice voting works and is used in mayoral and supervisor elections?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Ranked choice voting is a reform that was put in place. It was originally called instant runoff voting. And the reason ranked choice voting exists is, in this mayor's race, no one's going to get 50% plus one on election night. Not going to happen. There's too many candidates, and they all have their constituencies. Everyone's at around 20 to 25% right now. It's a wide open race. Right? In the old days, what would have happened is the top two candidates would have faced each other in a runoff 3 weeks after the election. Right? Because it's a presidential year, turnout in the election is going to be probably 80 to 85%. Right? Turnout in the runoff would be maybe 30%. Right? So far few people vote in the runoff, so that far fewer people actually choose the mayor. Right? So ranked choice voting is a reform that addresses that. It also addresses the spoiler effect, where there may be a candidate, you may really, really like Asha Safai, and you really want to vote for Asha for mayor, but you're afraid that if you vote for Asha, London Breed will win, because you don't think Asha's going to win. Right? Ranked choice voting addresses those two problems. In ranked choice voting, you get to rank up to 10 candidates for mayor. So you get to vote, say you really like London Breed, right? You vote for London Breed first, but you recognize that she might not win. And if London Breed doesn't win, you could kind of live with Daniel Lurie. He's your second choice. So you rank London Breed first and Daniel Lurie second. And then you say, well, I don't really like this guy Farrell, but I can live with Aaron Peskin third. So you put Aaron Peskin third. Okay, now what happens? On election night, all the votes are counted. No one gets 50% plus one. They take the person who comes in last. Let's say there's a bunch of minor candidates, but let's just say Safai comes in last of the top candidates. Right? All the people who voted for Asha Safai, all right, he's gone, he's eliminated. All of your second place votes now get redistributed. So if you voted for Asha Safai first and you voted for Aaron Peskin second, say, all right, then all of those second place votes gets added to Aaron Peskin's vote total. And they keep doing this. Then, let's say Daniel Lurie comes in second to last. They do the same thing with Daniel Lurie's second place votes. They get allocated to the next candidate up. And that happens until someone gets 50% plus one. Right? So essentially, you are ranking your choices, and they used to call it instant runoff because that's basically what it is. You're saying, okay, my first candidate is London Breed, but if London Breed doesn't win and it's a runoff between the next two candidates, here's the one that I want. Right? So it's important, first of all, to use ranked choice voting, to rank all your choices. It does not, bullet voting, just saying, the only person I trust is Mark Farrell. He's the only one I want for mayor. The rest of them are all, losers. He's the only one I want, so I'm just going to vote for him. That does no good. It doesn't help him. Right? That doesn't help him. The bullet voting doesn't help your candidate. So you might as well use all your choices and rank the candidates because someone's going to win. And that someone may not be your first choice. Right? As I say, your first choice may be London Breed. You think she's done a hell of a job and you really want her reelected, but she might not win. So rank your second choice as the person who you could next best live with if that person doesn't win.
And that's the case in mayoral as well as supervisor elections?
Mayoral as well as supervisor elections. So the mayor of San Francisco will be elected by ranked choice voting this fall. And you will be able to you can rank all of those, every candidate that I've talked about today, who are all the major candidates. You can rank all of them. You can list them all, vote for all of them. And you can put them in rank order. Or, there's a bunch of other minor candidates who will be on the ballot. You vote for anyone you want, but use your choices.
Why can't San Francisco offer rental subsidies as they do in Europe? Quality housing for everyone for acceptable rent, subsidies going to the low-income family, along with Kindergeld. I think Kindergeld would be subsidies for children.
Yeah, we can. There's no reason why the city can't do that, except for that $50 trillion that we don't have. I mean, Vienna is all the rage in California housing now. There's delegations from the governor's office, there's delegations from the mayor's, all kinds of people are going to Vienna and talking about how Vienna has solved the housing crisis, and they have. In Vienna, the city of Vienna builds between 6,000 and 8,000 units of social housing every year. Social housing. And social housing is not old-fashioned segregated public housing. Everyone lives in social housing in Vienna. Right? It is same thing in Stockholm, where wealthier people, working class people, middle class people, they all live in social housing. And the average person in Vienna pays 10% of their income on rent because the government pays for the housing and it's subsidized. Right? We could do that. If we had the tax money that's been stolen by the top 10%, we would have the money to do that. Absolutely. And that ultimately is the only thing that's going to work, is non-market social housing. Is the only solution. It's the only thing that's going to work. So there's no law saying we can't do that. We can. It's just a question of coming up with the money to do it. And if, in Vienna, the top income earners pay 55, maybe 60% of their marginal income in taxes, and the United States is 38%, but they don't pay 38% anyway. Jeff Bezos doesn't pay 38% of his income in taxes. He pays way less than that because his income is all capital gains, which are taxed at an even lower rate. Right? So yes, if we had that $50 trillion, we would have subsidized housing for everyone in San Francisco. We can.
Tim, with your knowledge of San Francisco, what is your perspective on Chief of Police Bill Scott?
I think Bill Scott has done a better job than his predecessors at keeping the cops from shooting people. I will give him credit for that. I think he is a police chief who believes that I don't know what he believes, he certainly says that the solution to crime is more law enforcement and arresting more people and locking more people up. I think that many of the reforms that the Obama-era Justice Department demanded that San Francisco do, some of them have been put in place, but I think that we still have police officers who are using, in fact, God, you could just look at the police commission agenda for this week and you look at all the internal affairs complaints on the police. There are still a lot of serious problems in the San Francisco Police Department. We have, I will say to Chief Scott's credit, the number of unarmed black people shot by the San Francisco Police Department has declined significantly since he took office. That was a very, very serious problem before he came into office. I don't see him, one of the things that some of the candidates for mayor are talking about, Aaron Peskin is definitely talking about this, is a need for more community policing. And community policing is get the cops out of their cars and have them walk around in the neighborhood and get to know people. This is what we have in North Beach. There's beat cops in North Beach who walk beats, who walk around and get to know the neighbors. Right? The cops, the rank and file cops, many of them don't like that. They'd rather be driving around in their cars than out walking a beat on the streets. Right? And Chief Scott has not put priorities into community policing. Now, he'll say that that's more expensive. You need more cops in an area than you have if you just have like 3 cops patrolling in cars, they can cover more area, all of this. Nevertheless, we know that community policing works. And it works better as a deterrent and making people feel safe than having cops in their cars responding to calls. And by the way, one of the biggest problems with public safety in San Francisco today is not a lack of cops, it's a lack of 911 dispatchers. 911 dispatchers are overwhelmed. We do not have enough people answering the phones at 911. So if you call 911 in an emergency, you may have to wait 30 seconds, a minute, you may be put on hold. And if there's an emergency, if your neighbor's house is on fire and you call 911, the last thing you want is to be put on hold because there aren't enough dispatchers. But when the mayor talks about how we need more cops, more money for cops, more money for cops, more money for cops, she's not talking about hiring more 911 dispatchers.
AI is evidently being utilized by Netanyahu's bombing campaign against Palestinian communities in Gaza. What role will AI have in our nation's future?
Well, that is a huge question, and it's a topic for another couple of hours. I don't think I can answer it in 5 minutes, but I can say that it is frightening in many ways, and it is frightening not only because of the prospects of what it can do. My son went on ChatGPT. He won't mind my telling you this. He went on ChatGPT when it first came out. And he had like the fancy one because he was a graduate student and he had like the one that cost $20 a month or whatever. And he told ChatGPT, write a story about housing and homelessness in San Francisco that sounds like it was written by Tim Redmond. And here comes a story in like 30 seconds that, I would have given it a C+. Wasn't quite there, but it's so there's and there's the whole what I'm very worried about, of course, is the deep fakes, because people it's so easy now to do a deep fake of Joe Biden tripping and falling down the stairs at Air Force One that then everyone will believe. Right? But there's a larger question here, and one that I think we really need to address with AI, and it's what I call the truck driver question. Okay, there are 2.3 million people in the United States of America whose job is truck driver. Most of them are men over 40. Many of them are making a middle-class living as a truck driver. What happens when all of those jobs are taken by robots? Which could happen very soon. What happens when all those jobs are taken by robots? What, are they going to retrain for the jobs of the future? They're going to learn to write code? No, they're not. This is going to be AI could create a society where a lot of the jobs that people do but don't really enjoy doing could be done by machines. And we could all have a lot more leisure time, and we could all work 10 hours a week and get the same salaries that we do today. Or all that money can go to the top 1%, and those people are going to be out on the streets, literally out on the streets. And that's the decision we have to make as a society, not only just in terms of regulating AI, but regulating the profits and the benefits that come from this technology displacing human beings. And it's going to displace human beings. It's going to displace a lot of human beings. My solution is tax the hell out of the rich people and just retire all those truck drivers. Just give them the money they're making now and let them retire and coach Little League and teach high school, whatever. Retire them, give them their money. Same thing with the coal miners. We're going to shut down the coal mines, retire them at full pay. How do we do that? With that $50 trillion that's been stolen from us thanks to the Reagan tax cuts.
Apparently we're having a little technical difficulties, and apologies to the folks that are online. We are working on resolving those problems. And could you also answer, given that, as you stated, the general conditions in San Francisco reflect the socioeconomic inequality of U.S. society in general, can you offer a few examples of how local elections of progressive leaders could address some of the most serious problems, such as homelessness and drug addiction?
Absolutely, and this is a really important question. I'm glad that somebody asked that question. San Francisco is limited in what we can do. By the state of California's authority limits what cities can do. So does the federal government. Right? So basically every policy tool that San Francisco can put to play to address economic inequality is a blown instrument. It's imperfect. Right? Rent control is imperfect. Right? We cannot have a city income tax. The state won't let us. So all of the taxes that we pass in San Francisco are blunt instruments, are imperfect. If we could have a city income tax and we could tax the billionaires in San Francisco, if we could have a city wealth tax and tax, that would be great. The federal government and the state government won't let us do that. We can't have commercial rent control, which would save small businesses. The state will. So what can we do? Well, for example, the progressives have passed a tax on real estate transactions of more than $10 million. This we can do as a city. transfer taxes on high-end real estate. That money, which now brings in more than $100 million a year, was supposed to go for housing for homeless people. The mayor won't spend it on that. The mayor controls the budget. She takes that money and puts it where she wants, to the cops or anything else. But we have that money, and that was supposed to be earmarked, so we can do that. Right? We passed a tax on businesses with gross receipts of more than $50 million. Again, we should have a corporate income tax. It's much more fair. But we can't because the state won't let us. So what do? We tax gross receipts. It's a blunt instrument. It's a relatively decent metaphor for profits. Not perfect. Not perfect. There are some places that have high gross receipts and low profits. Supermarkets, for example, have very high gross receipts and fairly low profit margin. It's not perfect. There are startups that have no product at all and no profit margin whatsoever, but lots and lots of money. Right? It's not perfect. The state won't let us do it. But there are a lot of tools that we can use. Right? It is progressives who have pushed for affordable housing in San Francisco, subsidized affordable housing. We have an inclusionary zoning ordinance, which basically says if you build 100 units of market rate housing, you have to build a certain number of units of affordable housing alongside it. Not perfect, but it's better than what we had. Right? So there are a lot of flaws. Plus, as I say, I think one of the most important things that's going to be happening in the next 5 years in San Francisco is regulating tech, regulating robot deliveries, regulating robocars, regulating the use of AI in San Francisco. How are we going to, and one of the things that cities can still do to a certain extent in California is regulate land use, regulate business, regulate things that happen within the city. And that's something that can be done.
How does the new California state real estate law that frees anyone who wants to buy or sell a house to be paid anything, no more 5% commission to split between two realtors?
I don't know how that's going to shake out. I'm not an expert in real estate commissions. I don't know how that's going to shake out. Some people say it's going to make it much harder for working people to buy a home because the real estate agents won't want to work with them. Some people say it's going to bring down the prices. I don't really know how that's going to play out. But I will say, since you asked about state law on housing, I don't know who asked this question, but there was a very interesting court decision about 2 weeks ago in Los Angeles. Right? One of the things that the state of California has done, thanks to Scott Wiener and a few others, is try to attempt to deregulate housing. Right? Attempt to take away from local communities the ability to regulate land use and regulate what gets built where. In the idea that if we deregulate housing, developers will build more of it and then prices will come down. Right? This is the idea. We have tried this for 50 years, it doesn't work. Deregulation, trickle-down economics doesn't work. We know that. But anyway, Scott Wiener seems to think it still does. So we're going to deregulate housing. And the idea is, if we deregulate housing, prices will come down. So the city of Redondo Beach, God help us all, not a poor working class community, very wealthy community, under one of the Wienerite laws, cities cannot stop people from splitting lots. In other words, in the city of Redondo Beach now, if a person has a large lot with one house on it, they can legally split it into 4 and build 4 houses on that lot. The idea being, of course, that more housing will make it cheaper. There is no evidence that that's actually going to happen. What's going to happen in Redondo Beach is you're going to have somebody who's got a house worth $2 million. They're going to split the lot into 4, and then they're going to build 4 more $2 million houses. And now you'll have 5 $2 million houses where you once had 1 $2 million house. That's just how the market works, right? That's what's going to happen. Anyway, so this goes before a judge. And the city says, you know, we're a charter city, state law, this, that, and the other thing. And the judge, in a very interesting decision, comes down and says, hey, charter cities have the right to regulate land use unless the state can prove an overriding issue of statewide concern, right? Traffic and highways, there's all kinds of overriding issues that cross city and county lines. And the judge says, okay, according to SB 9, the law that allows lot splitting, the overriding state concern that lets us trample on local law is the need for affordable housing. Fair enough. That's a statewide concern. The housing crisis is statewide. So the judge says, but wait a minute. Splitting lots in Redondo Beach is not going to create any affordable housing. There's no evidence that building market rate housing in a rich community like this will create any affordable housing. So that can't be, if that's the state's overriding concern, it doesn't work. This is the first time a judge, to my knowledge, a court in California has said that there is no evidence that building more market rate housing brings prices down. This will go to the Supreme Court, that this is not going to stand the way it is. But it's the first time that in a court case we're actually having the right discussion, which is not is density good, but does density bring down prices?
We're going to have you answer a question that's from chat now, Tim. What do you think of the need for the structure of San Francisco government has to change so that the mayor doesn't have so much power and never has to see the public. This city-county model doesn't work.
Yes, a very interesting question. I think that what the city should do under the next mayor, and this mayor will not do it for obvious reasons, but I think the next mayor needs to appoint what's called a charter reform panel. And they need to create a panel, a community-based panel, to look at the city charter from the beginning to the end and reform it. There's a lot of problems with the city charter. One of them being that the mayor has too much power, and that the balance of power between the legislative and the executive branch is too skewed to the executive branch. I don't know exactly. I mean, the city has made incremental changes. It used to be that the mayor appointed all of the members of all of the major commissions. Now the supervisors get 3 of the 7 on the planning commission, on the police commission, and on some of the most important commissions, the supervisors get, but still a minority. The mayor still appoints a majority of the members of every commission. Is that the best way to do it? I don't know. In Berkeley, commissions are appointed, I think they still do it this way. In Berkeley, every member of the city council appoints 1 member of a commission. So the planning commission, for example, has 9 members on it. Each one is appointed by 1 member of the city council, which is district elected. So that more reflects the district elected. I don't know if that's the right idea for San Francisco, but there's a lot of ideas out there, and I think that we need to look at the city charter from top to bottom and look at a lot of changes in it.
Tim Redmond, thank you very much for your presentation. We're hearing the bell that is summoning us to our Sunday service. Your website is
48hills.org, and I will just say very quickly, we survive on donations. I'm trying right now to get 1,000 people to give us $10 a month. That's my campaign for this summer. If you can afford to give $10 a month, go to 48hills.org and click on, if you can give $20 a month, give $20 a month. If you're a billionaire, come see me.
Thank you very much, Tim Redmond.
Thanks. It's not a crime-infested hellhole. It's really not. That is not true. But that narrative has been created. Right? This adds to the doom loop downtown. The city is out of control. Crime is out of control. We need to do something. They recalled the district attorney. Chesa Boudin lost his job because of this media mythology. The San Francisco crime was out of control. All right? But now we got a problem. All right? Now you got unhappy voters. You've got this mythology of a doom loop and of crime out of control. And now guess what? First, the mayor blamed the district attorney. It's all because Chesa Boudin is too liberal and isn't locking people up enough. Right? Then she blamed the Board of Supervisors and their liberal policies of creating. But pretty soon, people are starting to say, wait a minute, aren't you in charge?